Okay. Very cool, that works. That's the first time I'm doing that in public. I trained for that for almost a year. And now I took all my courage to do it in public.
See, he can learn.
Yeah, I can, yeah. In spite of my old age. So you young whippersnappers, can learn new stuff.
Right.
Okay, so welcome to Meetup of Test with Michael Bolton tonight. So I would like to start first with thanking Ergon. They have been my super buddies for many, many years because they are super generous in always providing the venue for this meetup. So we're very happy to be here. This time it's a different location. Normally we're at the other side, just across the street. I would also like to announce that Ergon is currently hiring like crazy. So they want super developers. So if you are a developer and you want to work in a really cool, equal opportunity, super fantastic, family-friendly, cool people company, apply to Ergon. Except don't do that because we're hiring too. As a test, yes, we're hiring. We're also an equal opportunity employer, looking for technical testers, people who have an engineering background, passionate in testing, and just want to work in also almost as cool company as Agile. So that's us. So yeah, Meetup of Test has grown to be the biggest software testing meetup in Switzerland by its members that are registered on the site. Who is here for the first time? Oh, very cool. Welcome, welcome. So what we do here is usually we have different tracks. So there is one where we have people invited from Canada or from other countries that are experts in testing. The reason they're usually here in Switzerland is because there are courses they're giving. So there will be a rapid software testing course happening in the coming 3 days. And that's why Michael is here.
Still time to register?
Yes, there is still time to register. So if you feel like not going to your office tomorrow, I have a way out. So just talk to me if you think that would be a good idea. Good. So tonight we'll have Michael Bolton, who will be talking about the Agile Quadrants and refactoring of those. So this will be interesting. So I shut up now and hand over to you.
Thank you.
All right, enjoy.
Thanks. I got off a plane at 7:30 this morning. The nearest hotel to where I'm staying doesn't let people check in until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I spend most of my day at Starbucks. So I'm simultaneously exhausted and wired at the same time. Cheers. How many people are working in agile environments? Oh, I love this. Is it agile or is it? I know.
Oh, is it what?
I know. AINO, agile in name only. I think a lot of places.
It's in name.
In name only. So you do the given when then thing?
What?
Do you do the given when then? You know that thing?
Yes.
You do.
We do.
All right. Here's my take on that. Oh, and of course the clicker is on the wrong screen. The PowerPoint doesn't have that do what I mean function that I have. Okay, so given that I'm a human being and a passionate and committed tester, and people talk about agile software development and reduce it to a bunch of formulated keywords and reduce testing to mechanistic checking, that really bugs me. And reduce qualifications to multiple choice questionnaires and dismiss deep, skilled, rich, inexpensive, fast testing, and don't help to make life better for people, then I get upset. And I have too much to talk about in only 1 hour. Which is, I think, it's my allocated time, right? I got an hour?
I've stopped allocating hours to you because you...
Okay, I always go beyond it anyway, right? So, fair enough. In the year after my daughter was born, I got to participate in my first Agile project in an Agile organization. It was a company, it was originally called CertiPay, I think, and it had been bought by a larger outfit called the Interac Association. Basically, the developers, it was a startup, and the developers and one of the senior managers for it got picked up by the Interac Association. Interac Association is like the Plus system, but a Canadian version of it. A sort of made in Canada thing. It's the Interac Association is owned by the big 5 Canadian banks, and they had 5 or 6 developers, and then a database administrator, and a couple of testers, and a security guy, and then a kind of founder guy who, at the time, I wasn't sure very much what he did, but he did something businessy and running the organization-ish. And I was kind of excited by it because I gave a talk kind of like this one a few months earlier, and it turns out that they were looking for somebody to replace a woman who was going on maternity leave. I thought, this is great. I'm going to get to work in an Agile environment. And what was kind of cool about it was, that was when Agile was, when the carcass was still warm, you know, before it had become like this thing that you just had to be. All of a sudden it was, you know, this was an innovative kind of place, and it was really cool because we had daily stand-up meetings. That was kind of neat. Except the daily stand-up meetings were sort of weird, because at one point, one of the other testers and I said, you know, we always have the daily stand-up meeting on the developer side of the cubicle. One of the testers and I shared a cubicle on this side, and then, or had a cubicle, one here, and then the developers all sat around in this thing just on the other side of us, literally over the wall. And one day we said, hey, well, you know, this is Agile and so on and so forth. Why don't we have our stand-up over here on the tester's side? And you wouldn't believe the opposition we got to that for the developers. Oh, we can't have this in here. Well, why not? Well, because, you know, it's not where we usually have it. Yeah, well, so what? We're Agile, right? Well, but that's the door that way. And then there's the corridor that way. So we can't just have it, you know, in the middle of this space like that. We sit here all the time. About 4 people a day go through this space. It was just amazing to see how, even in a place that was ostensibly Agile, how people would get dug in. They get sort of stuck into doing things that were normal. So, still, it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool to be in a place that was officially like the places I had worked with in the past, mostly where I'd worked. I spent 8 years in a commercial software company as a program manager and as a tester, and although we had a really close relationship with the developers, we weren't in the same place. Well, at least at the beginning we were, but then the company got bigger, and so we put the testers over here, the developers over here. In fact, the developers were on another floor, and the testers were down on the ground floor of the same building. And then we moved to another building, and the developers were over there, and the testers were way someplace else. So that was kind of weird. The tech support people, of course, were separated from all those things. That seemed more Agile, it seemed, than anything that came after that to me. And I started traveling around, I started hearing weird stuff. This is why I'm becoming a grumpy old man. First of all, testing is getting confused with checking the build. Testing the product is getting confused with checking the build. And I keep, these days I keep hearing about automation. I keep hearing about, for a while I heard about test automation. And then I just heard about automation. It's like we've become allergic to the word test. And what are people talking about all the time? They're talking about automation. As though automation were the only thing involved in testing. Just make the product do something. I got upset about that. And so I think that because we're being swamped by this impulse for technology, this impulse to do things faster, to do things like the programmers do, like the big kids do, I worry that we're losing connection with what it is that makes testing really important, which is trying to find problems that matter to people. And for that, I get painted with this anti-tool brush. I am not opposed to tools. I use tools every day. I love tools. I like tools. I hate to see machinery become the center of things instead of human purposes. Using tools to amplify our capabilities, to amplify our skills, our ability to probe the product, to learn about the product. Tools can help us to be powerful, but just as quickly as tools can help us to be powerful, if we are wise and smart and powerful people, just as quickly tools can extend our dumbness, our silliness, our shallowness, our triviality. And what I'm seeing at conferences and in testing talk and on the forums and places like that, it feels like we're trying to avoid making contact with the product. Like we're not, don't touch it, don't even look at it, right? It's like that moment in Spinal Tap. He says, no, you've looked at it for long enough. No, you don't look at that anymore. So that's why I'm becoming a grumpy old guy. Now, of course, I don't remember where I was when I first saw it. But I do know I wrote 4 pages in this book. This book that described Agile testing. I wrote a 4-page section on exploratory testing. Everybody seems to have forgotten that part. Why it seemed to me that exploratory approaches to testing were fundamentally agile, because they were all about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. They were about responding to change over following a plan. They were all about answering customer needs, customer collaboration over negotiated contracts, and they were also exactly about working software over comprehensive documentation, right? Those are things that I thought were fantastic. I loved the notion of Agile when it first came out. And then it took about 15 minutes, it seemed, before people on the Agile testing mailing list were asking, oh, what's the best tool to implement my Agile process? Ah! When it comes to the quadrants themselves, my colleague James first bumped into him in 2003 or so. Brian Merrick described this thing. You were downstairs helping people in. Provides a moment for me to have a sweet beer. I didn't hear about them very much longer after that, 2003, 2004, something like that. And I was an early participant in the Agile testing mailing list, because there used to be mailing lists and that in those days. And they talked about tools a lot, but they didn't seem to talk about actual testing. Critically examining a product, experimenting with it, exploring it, gaining experience with it. There was lots of talk about automated checking. They didn't call it automated checking. Of course, nobody did until 2009 or so. Elizabeth Hendrickson was starting to talk about checking stuff for output. Ward Cunningham was talking about checked examples. And then in 2009, I kind of put down a stake in the sand and I said, we got to distinguish between testing and checking. And it took a long time for us to start saying that in a way that was clear and made sense. It took until about 2013 for us to get the idea nailed down to the point where we're happy with it. But anyway, in 2008, I got tired of all this talk about testing. It wasn't really talk about testing. So I dropped out of the Agile testing mailing list. And I think that the Agile Quadrants have helped to confuse people about testing, to entrench some misunderstandings about it. And but that happens. See, when you come up with an idea and you talk about it and people start talking about it, what happens is the idea spreads around the world. And it's like Jerry Weinberg's law of raspberry jam. The wider you spread it, the thinner it gets. And Agile, I think, is kind of like that too. And the quadrants were like that as well. And we've learned since then, we've learned a lot about how to talk better about testing and how to distinguish testing and checking in useful ways. Checking is a part of testing, it's a tactic of testing. And if you like, those of you who are new to the rapid software testing world and the way we talk about testing and checking, I can go into that if you like a little bit later on. But we've learned enough since the Agile testing quadrants first came out that we can do some maintenance work on them and maintain them. James and I, on a grumpy day in Sweden in late May of 2014, went to a bunch of cafes. We went to 3 different cafes in one day, and we talked and argued about this stuff, and we set it out. So what you're going to see now is mostly stuff that we came out with like 5 years ago, and then just proceeded not to tell anybody about it, really. And we've been thinking about it lately and developing some new ideas about it, and now we're kind of happy with it. So that's what I'm going to speak about today. All right, so here is Brian Merrick's original Agile testing quadrants. My understanding is, and I'm not sure if this is correct, but I'm pretty sure that this was triggered by ideas that he got from Ken Kainer. And he thought that there were pairs of polarities. Business-facing testing, or tests, and technology-facing testing, or tests. And then another polarity was critiquing the product and supporting programming on the other side. And that got a certain amount of traction from some people. And, Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory picked it up and put it in their book, the book just called Agile Testing, and this is their earlier version. Now, the first thing to notice, it seems to me, is this change that went from supporting programming to supporting the team. And I thought, well, it's kind of odd. But then here's what's really weird about it to me. In both cases, supporting the team is opposite from critiquing the product. But wait a second. That's really weird. Because that's what testers do, right? Testers critique the product. In fact, anybody who's doing testing at all is in some sense critiquing the product. Not in a sense of disparaging it, not in a sense of saying bad product, but in the sense that a film critic might, right? Being a film critic is somebody who looks at films and movies and so on and tries to articulate how the movie is going to land with the audience. And that's what testing does, that's what testers do. But that is supporting the team. So I don't see how those are opposites. And then there's business facing and technology facing, okay. But here's something that really annoyed me. Automated and manual tools. What does that mean? What does that mean? First of all, there's no such thing as manual testing. Everybody got that? There's no such thing as manual testing. In exactly the same way as there's no such thing as manual programming. Are you a manual programmer or are you an automated programmer? No programmer would hear that question and not look at you funny. Are you a manual manager or an automated manager? I'm sure people here go to the doctor every now and again. Do you go to an automated doctor or do you go to a manual doctor? Nobody talks about that. Are there manual teachers and automated teachers? Are there manual parents and automated parents? Nobody talks like that. Well,
Yes.
there is the TV, right? You put them in front of the TV.
Manual varies, manual pilot and autopilot. This one.
Now, here's where I'm going to respond to this. I don't know how many of you know Alex Baudouin. Put your hand up if you know Alex. Put your hand up if you don't know Alex. All right. So funny thing happened 2 years ago. James and I were teaching together a rapid software testing class right here in Zurich, and Alex shows up, and he's got this flight case, and he's got a sticker on it that says, "If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going." And it's on a flight case. And we suddenly realize, dude's an airline pilot. All of the women and half the men are going, yeah, an airline pilot. Ooh, he's an airline pilot. Alex, I think, Alex is one of my 2 nominees for coolest tester in the world. Because he used to test the simulators for the 777. And he used to fly 777s. And he did a fantastic talk just about exactly a year ago today in Poland. I sat watching a 2-hour talk where Alex talked about manual piloting and automated piloting. First of all, the automated piloting is a good deal harder than the manual piloting, just like it is with what we call automated testing. It requires different kinds of expertise. It requires expertise in how to pilot the plane, and how to do all the things that are required to fly one of these incredibly complicated pieces of machinery. And then there's an extra layer on top of that, where you have to be able to deal with this extra sophisticated machinery that flies the plane. In the same way that, a similar way at least, that cruise control drives the car. It requires more skill, more trouble to do an auto landing on an airplane than it does to do a so-called manual landing. But there's enormous, Alex proves my point really wonderfully by helping us recognize this. No matter what you do on a commercial airliner, there's stacks and stacks and layers of what I will call tools. But the plane is not flying itself. The plane is always under the control, the supervision of somebody with immense skill and immense responsibility. Have I conveyed that correctly? See, there you go. So people talk about, now it's funny because pilots are funny that way because they talk about, the plane just really flies itself. I don't do very much, in this self-deprecating way that pilots sometimes do. But if you actually watch what a pilot does, I love what Patrick Smith says about this. Oh yeah, the planes fly themselves, they land themselves. He says, put a civilian in either one of those 2 chairs and ask them to figure out how the radio works. They're not going to be able to do it. So extra skills are required if you're going to apply tools, if you're going to do automated checking. It seems to me that you've got to be a splendid tester and you have to have mastery of programming as well. But all testers use tools. We use tools all the time. Then there's a bunch of other stuff that bugged me. Unit tests, component tests, automated? Really? I mean, they're mediated by tools. Sometimes they're not. We don't use the GUI. We don't use the interface that's designed by humans. But is that automated? It's not. It's an investigative process. It's a thoughtful process. Machinery doesn't do the work. Machinery helps us do the work, but the machinery doesn't do the work. Automated and manual. As I said, there's no such thing as manual testing. Manual? Oh, and exploratory testing is in there? Is there no exploratory testing over here in business-facing testing that supports the team? Exploration is all the way through all of these things. Ilari testing. But surely if we're talking about technology-facing testing that supports a team. What about maintainability? What about portability? What about localizability? What about testability? Isn't that an Ilari, and doesn't it go in there? Story tests. Are story tests not business-facing critique of the product? A lot of problems I have with this. So, here's the thing, that Merrick's original talk about this stuff, and his comments on it, talk about simple output checks. You test your product with putting the value in here, and watching to see you get the right output over there, as being integral to programming. Well, okay, so maybe he was talking about critical distance. What's critical distance? Brief detour. By critical distance, when we talk about critical distance, we mean a difference between two ways of thinking about something, or an absence of something in favor of thinking about other things. And it is true that if you're working really closely with something, if you're a programmer writing some code, here's one thing you can do. You can look at, and I don't want this to be disparaging. I want to be clear about this. It's shallow testing in the sense that it doesn't take a lot of time or effort or skill, other than the programming skill that goes along with it. It doesn't take a lot of extra support to do it. And it is not intended to be particularly thorough. It's a really good idea to do it, but it's close to what you're doing as a programmer. It's very close to that. Something that's at farther critical distance is something that's farther away from the programmer's experience of the product and more like somebody else's, the tester's experience of the product or the user's experience of the product. So deep, long-form testing for more kinds of risks than just functional risks. Testing for things that would be an element in the user's experience, day-to-day experience of the product. What we're toying with calling experiential testing of the product. That requires further critical distance from where the programmer's working, at the coal face of the code. If you want to get experience with the product, you've got to jump out of the programmer's mindset to something that is farther distance from the programmer's mindset. So that's what we're talking about. Now, there's another kind of distance, which is social distance, which means anything that gets in the way of people getting along, anything that gets in the way of collaboration, harmony, cooperation, good feelings, and so on. So, what we suggest very strongly is that testers cultivate critical distance and try to eliminate social distance. Work as closely with the programmers as you can, but maintain at the same time a kind of intellectual and critical distance away from what the programmers are doing. In other words, it can be a bad thing for testers to be too close to the programmer's mindset all the time, because then we'll start thinking like the programmers do, which is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's just bad if we want to look for other kinds of risks, if we want to keep our minds open to the possibilities of non-programming oriented kinds of problems. So, let's treat this as all connected stuff. So, the problem I had with the Crispin and Gregory version, it implies that critique isn't supporting the team, and that critique isn't the work of programming, but it's both. And programmers can provide critique. Testing is supporting the team. And then there's another subtle little suggestion about it. It suggests that testers don't have a place in Agile. And this was fairly common early on, especially, unless they're programmers, unless they write code. Kent Beck famously said early on that he wanted only two roles in his model of how to do software development, a programmer role and a customer role. And here's the testers going, wait, we're kind of like both and each one, and we're sort of different from both of the two. And I think Kent has come around since then to that. It's a story that James tells better. But here's the thing. To be a fantastic tester, You may write code. You may not write code. I've met fabulous testers who use their social skills, who use their capacity to understand problems in the business domain that other testers wouldn't be able to do. I think it's a great idea for testers to learn the code. It's not that hard. It's not that hard to become an adequate programmer, to be able to write stuff that helps you get your work done. It's a fine thing to do. But for some people, it just doesn't float their boat. It's not what they want to do, and I think that's okay. Diversity is what's important, not this central focus on code as being the most amazing, wonderful thing. And so, as I said earlier, tools aren't remarkable. Good testers are using tools all the time. Some of those involve writing code, some of them do not. There may be some useful distinctions to be made on the ways that we interact with the product. We might interact in a very direct way with the product, looking at it and interacting with it, gaining experience with it as a user might, or we might be mediating our interaction with the product when we're looking at the component level or at the unit level. So it might also be relevant to think about what in particular we're looking at. So, then there's another problem with all this, and it's subtle, but it's still a problem in the way the quadrants are framed. Referring to tests as things. Examples are tests. Test cases are tests, they say. I don't think so. In the same way that sheet music is not music. Sheet music is notation for music. Sheet music is the part of music, it's a notation system by which people perform music. But what's important about music is the performance until somebody plucks a string or scrapes a bow over a string or blows air through something or whacks something with a mallet until air starts to vibrate. There's no music there. Music happens when somebody performs music, when somebody makes music. And you go, well, what about electronic music? People make electronic music. What about the music that the computers are generating? Well, the music that computers are generating, a person listens to that music and says, I'm going to keep it or I'm going to throw it out. The humans are still in charge. We may use tools to help us make music, but music is decidedly a human thing. The most important parts of testing, I think, are things that happen in the mind. And a lot of the time, the things that happen in the mind are tacit. They're not said, they're not told, they're not written down, they're not drawn, they cannot be encoded in a string of bits. A test is what you think and what you do. And to a great degree, the knowledge that's in your head and the knowledge that's in your interaction with other people, that's stuff that can't be written down. And I would love to do a whole talk on that, but I'll refer you to the work of Harry Collins and his two books on this subject. One is The Shape of Actions, which I believe is co-written with Martin Cush, and his own solo book called Tacit and Explicit Knowledge. Very important books for testers to read and to grasp, I think, if you want to be a real expert at this stuff. Then there's this whole business about how important it is for business people to read the tests. That pissed me off too. Why? You know, if we're going to do that, why don't we get the business people to read the code as well? Why don't we get testers, or why don't we get the business people to write the code? They hire us to do this stuff. This is the service we provide. We can talk about testing with them. We can talk about the product. We can tell stories about the product. We can tell stories about risks. And we can tell stories about how we covered the product. But the business people hire us to do this stuff on their behalf. Why make them write tests? And a test isn't something you write anyway. A test is something you do. So, I would prefer to talk about testing, to demonstrate testing, to show testing in action. See over here and have the kind of conversations that are absolutely implicit in that first premise of the Agile Manifesto. We value individuals and their actions over processes and tools. And the other ones too. customer collaboration over negotiated contracts, which is what automated checks and BDD smell a lot like to me. Responding to change over following a plan. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So, a couple of years later, Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory came out with a newer version of the Agile Quadrants, and they fixed a few problems. Give them credit. For one thing, they got rid of the bubbles over there, and they guide development, critique the product, a little better. Why might you like these things? Well, there's a reasonable reason to like them. They're a kind of diversified test strategy. There's strategy ideas in those quadrants that are, to some degree, helpful. And I think that's why people glommed onto them. It gave them some starting ideas for how you might test a product. Now, first definite improvement is they got rid of the automated and manual and tools thing. That's good. Guiding development is still a little bit strange. And both versions still have those problems that I mentioned before. The Ilari's being in one place and one place only, where Ilari's pervade all the things. Exploratory work should be in all of the quadrants, it seems to me. Business-oriented systems integration is there, but technology-oriented systems integration is missing. So, how are we going to fix it? Well, James and I spent an afternoon and a little bit of time after that arguing about it. And here's something that we thought was kind of important to think about. What if we took those dimensions and refactored them, tweaked them a little bit in terms of what the business wants? Because that's who we're all here for. Programmers, testers, designers, infrastructure people, DevOps people, documenters, subject matter experts. We're all here to support the business. So let's think in terms of what the business wants. Let's start with that. And then let's think in terms of building it and studying it. Because, look, high-value product, that's how the business plans to keep customers, keep the money coming in. It's funny, on the first time I presented testing and checking, a 2-minute lightning talk, J.B. Rainsberger, a programmer and an expert on test-driven development, who I admire very greatly, good friend. I try to visit him every summer when I'm in Prince Edward Island. He talked about check-driven development. Here's your check. So I thought that was a great idea. We're all in this to help the business make money and to please customers. Building it, well, that's how the business gets something it wants and it can sell to the customers. The business wants to keep the cost of development low and make business sustainable. And then there's this other thing that we should probably do before we inflict a product on our clients, and that is to study it. That's how to find out whether the business really got what it wanted, or at least as close as we can before it lands in that empirical space where actual customers get their hands on it. So, that was our first move. Phasings are beside the point. The business wants to produce something of value, it needs us to do that efficiently, and it needs to learn what it values over time. So this is not a straight 1, 2, 3, 4 process, as we shall shortly see. The core idea behind Agile, as we saw it, as James and I saw it, as I experienced it in other projects that I'd work on, the core heuristic and the thing that really appealed to us was, let's keep refocusing on how to produce value and how to reduce the cost of change, because the need for change is a given. Change is gonna happen. Change is gonna happen, and if you can't adapt to change, you're gonna be sunk. So, let's reduce the cost of change. And by cost, I don't just mean the dollar cost, but the cognitive cost, the maintenance cost of change. That means that the technology-facing stuff turns into building stuff with change in mind. Stuff that the business doesn't actually care about directly, only implicitly. It's what we do in order to help the business able to adapt when the market or the customers decide that they want something different. That's why we do it. That's what we're here for. Now, I want to go back one step farther back to even before Agile. And that informs the next thing we thought of, which is what is the grand unified cycle of software development? We discover something worth building, we build some of it, and we build it virtuously. And then we study what we built so that we can discover something else worth building, or, as sometimes happens, something worth fixing, something worth rebuilding, and then we build some of that, we build it virtuously again, and we study what we built until we move on to the next thing that we want to build, and or we ship it. So, before Agile, that cycle looked like this. We discover something worth building, and we build some of it. That is to say, almost all of it. Now, we spend a year or 2 or 3. I'm working with a client right now who is on the 3rd year of a 4-year project. Wow. What's the project? They're migrating something from one platform to the next. 4 years they're in this thing. And they're sort of concerned that it might not work. Like, they might just be discovering stuff. Well, it'd be a good time to start finding out now, don't you think? So they're very concerned about getting it right the first time. And what that means is that development becomes slow and ponderous and super careful, ultra careful, such that people are afraid to take steps at all because there's so much at stake all in this one big bang. And then when you study what you built, you find, it's festered with bugs. So after your first big long loop, then there's a few short panicky ones where you try to fix at least a few bugs before releasing them. Because that's another thing, of course. In a long project, they've set aside some time for testing. There's a development phase, and then there's a testing phase. And then you find out, of course, that because the development phase went longer than you thought, the testing phase is like this. James, years ago, pointed out, this is crazy. It's like, driving from here to Bern. So you got, in that, of course, you have a steering phase and then a looking out the window phase. That's not how you drive. You look out the window continuously as you go. So, and then this is another part of traditional development. That may look familiar to you. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. You had 7 years to review it, and then in 2015 they came out with the final version of it, which is exactly the same as the first version. They didn't change it at all. Over a 7-year review period, this is a test planning project. That's from ISO 29119. Brought to you by certificationists who are still partying like it's 1999.
It's drowned. It's gone. It's so gone.
I think we did a good job on that. I think we managed to raise enough of this thing, enough people writing and speaking loudly about it. Oh, you tell the story. Give me a break. Seriously, tell the story.
All right. There was this effort to build a standard on testing, and that's super funny because standards help where systems are harmed by variation. Now, does that sound like testing? Testing is certainly not a system that's harmed by variation. So we found an organization called the International Society for Software Testing, and what we did is we just swamped the Google searches with critical blog posts on that standard. So when you search for ISO 29119, the first 3 pages were just critical blog posts on that standard. And they plan to release a 4th part that probably, it just never happened. And so it's so gone, and we're pretty happy with that trolling activity.
And it all started thanks to a wonderful guy. Everybody who's involved in testing, especially in regulated environments, I believe should know about this guy. A guy named James Christie, who's an extremely tall fellow with a very thick Scottish accent. He lives in Dundee, and he's a wonderful man, and he introduced me to a term that I'd never heard before, rent-seeking. Rent-seeking is when somebody on a public road sets up a toll booth and says, you got to pay to get past. James, I think, James Christie gets the credit for really having lit a fire under all of us, and my hat's off to him. See? Look, Ma, no loops. A nice straight linear process. Then, however, came Agile software development, the manifesto for Agile software development. And I was thrilled when I saw this. I thought, wow, this is really cool. I'd read a book called Refactoring, and then I'd read a book called Extreme Programming Explained by Kent Beck, which is interesting. I was bonded by how kind of short-shrifted testers, but it did seem pretty cool. Like this really humanist approach to developing software. Remember? We're uncovering is right. They are rediscovering ways of building software that had existed in the 50s when everybody who worked on the product knew what the product was and how it worked together. And so you had subject matter experts and programmers and product designers all in the same place, working really closely with each other. And stuff was written in COBOL so everybody could read it, or Fortran so everybody could read it and kind of wrap their heads around it and understand it. And 30 years later, they kind of rediscovered this stuff. And I don't want to dismiss the role that the people who drafted the Agile Manifesto had. It was really thoughtful and wonderful. Through this work, we've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan, and then the bit that everybody forgets about, that is, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. But, of course, lots of people looked down this and said, individuals and interaction, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. Oh, processes and tools, let's get rid of them. Comprehensive documentation, let's not write any of that. Contract negotiation, let's throw those out. Following the plan, let's not do that. And like any manifesto, it gets picked up by people, and people pick what they like, and they throw away what they don't like, and they don't really think about the whole thing and reflect on it. They think, oh, no comprehensive documentation? This looks good. No documentation at all! So those things that got covered up over 30 years, and they uncovered them, which is wonderful. I thought it was a terrific thing. So what they did was they made a few changes. First of all, they said instead of building almost all of it, we're going to build almost none of it. Almost none of it at all. And instead of building it virtuously, being get it right the first time, build it virtuously is going to turn into build it with change in mind. Because we know it's going to change. So why not build a tiny bit of it and change that? And when we've got that to a state where we believe we've wrapped our heads around, because we're going to make some mistakes, when we study what we built, we want to discover the problems and fix them right away. And then we can discover something worth building really quickly and fix that. Go around the loop again. And we get lots of short loops so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. So bugs don't get buried for too long. And we try to orient ourselves towards finding bugs as early as we can, and there's lots of ways of doing that, and we're going to go into that in a sec. But the idea is instead of one big, huge, long loop and then a bunch of really short, panicky ones, we do a bunch of really crisp, fast cycles of development so that we build a product that we understand as we build it. That's really important. So we deliver often, not necessarily to the customer. I don't think it's a great idea to deliver to the customer before it's something that the customer is going to appreciate. I'm kind of skeptical about the minimum viable product thing, because usually it emphasizes the minimal and doesn't put enough emphasis on the viable, I think. Let's try to build something that the customers will like and appreciate, and we'll see the value of. But also, there's a case to be made. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's test it empirically with real customers a little bit, but that doesn't mean that every time we build, we have to give it to the customers. I have yet to see, in fact, a really, really good business case for pushing a new build out every 15 minutes. I do see a good case, though, for being able to put out a build in 15 minutes if we discover something disastrous. I can see how that might be a good thing, but I don't want to. I don't. You know, if you're like a news site, I can see you updating your content every 15 minutes, but your code underneath it, you're going to have to convince me of the value of that. Now, it could be true. It could be a really, really good idea to pump out a new version of your software every 15 minutes. It seems to be risky, but maybe you've got a good reason for that. I'm agnostic about it, very skeptical. Collaborate across roles, great idea. Develop craftsmanship. What I'm doing, by the way, is I'm plucking out 7 ideas from the 12 Agile Principles that followed the 4 basic items in the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. This is a kind of a cherry picking and synthesis of the things that James and I thought were most important. You might think other things are more important. That's okay. These are the 7 things that we thought were most important. We wanted to keep it down to some kind of comprehensible list. So, deliver often, collaborate across roles, develop craftsmanship. Don't be too formal. That seemed to be us implicit from the manifesto and the rules. Be prepared to try things, to fail, and to learn. I'm a little skeptical about move fast and break things. I'd rather say move fast and understand things. Or move fast and be able to build things if it turns out you screwed up. But you know, this whole build fast and break things, that's like a Silicon Valley programmer's idea. You know, this stuff must be disruptive. Well, we've seen the consequences of being too disruptive, certainly in America and in Britain, when things essentially escape the lab and get out of control. But on principle, be prepared for failure. Be prepared to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. That's a great idea, I'd say. Build and use tools expertly. Definitely. Let's get ourselves building and using tools for people to use, for us to use too. And then, number 7 on our list, which is somewhere in the list of 12 things, seek a sustainable pace. Oh boy, did that one ever get forgotten, didn't it? I hear so often about testers who are working in allegedly agile in name-only places. What happens, as Robert Martin says, on the 9th day of the sprint, the developers drop a great load of code on the testers, and the testers have to deal with that in the last 24 hours of what is officially designated as a sprint. There's a whole bunch of things that are messed up with that. It seems to me, what is a sprint? A sprint is just a date on which we're going to have a meeting and we're going to say, okay, what have we got and what have we learned? I think it's a big mistake. And it's personal opinion, but I think it's a big mistake to commit to something, to finishing something by the end of the sprint. Because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what we're going to learn along the way. We don't know what obstacles we're going to run into. We know to some degree, but we don't know all of it. So here's, I think, a commitment that I can make faithfully, reliably, and hit it every time. I commit to trying to finish something by the end of the sprint. And if I don't, that's okay. Because I didn't know at the beginning what it was going to take. I didn't know what I would learn along the way. I didn't know that in order to jump from A to E, I can't just do that jump. I've got to do B and C and go back to B and fix that because there's a problem in the way I did that. And I'm going to have to do D and then go back and fix C. Oh, and then B again because I don't know at the beginning of the sprint what the end of the sprint is going to look like. I'm committed to trying it, but if I don't finish that work by the end of the sprint, that's okay. No loss as long as I learn from it. And I think that's a much more pragmatic and a more pragmatic way to think about it, much more faithful to the spirit of what I believe the Agile Manifesto is all about. Teams that are rushing work at the end of the sprint in order to fulfill the commitment to finish by the end of the sprint, that system's going to get gamed. Absolutely, that system's going to get gamed. People are going to cut corners one way or another, or people are going to take on punishing amounts of overtime, or they're going to cheat somehow or other so that they can say they got it done even though they didn't. Why not just say, here's what we're going to try to do for the next 2 weeks. We'll try to get it done, and we'll learn every day from what's happening, and at the end of the sprint, we'll look at where we stand and figure out what we've got to do next. That, to me, is the spirit of Agile. So, 2 cheers for Agile software development. I think if only we had adopted the spirit of it, things would have been better. But of course, as happens with any new movement, tribes start to develop. So we had tribes of the craftspeople, the extreme programming crowd, and then we had a bunch of people, many of them testers, who said, can't we all just get along? So that was a different crowd, different tribe. And then we had people who were process enthusiasts, and so they came up with the Kanban boards and the sticky notes and so on and so forth. And yes, we can all learn from each other, but I think there are different flavors or strands or tribes of Agile. And marketers and certifiers showed up. And confusion about testing and confusion about tests and confusion about agility. What can we do to fix it? Here is our modest attempt. First of all, let's get straight on the idea that it's got to be about more than programmers. It was actually a feature of the early days of Agile software development, and this is where it came from. It came from the idea that programmers had been working with testers who weren't very good, so it seemed, and who were being obstacles to the project rather than services to it, and who were saying things like, you can't do that. They're being kind of like a quality police, and they were not finding important bugs. And so the extreme programming people, in what I think was a feature, said, you know what, as programmers, it's really important for us to take responsibility for the quality of our own work. Yay. And led to a great degree by Ward Cunningham, who I believe is one of the great souls of software development. The guy who invented the wiki, and by extension Wikipedia. And he invented FIT, the framework for integrated testing, which was a really, all you young whippersnappers may not have heard of this, but it was it's a little like BDD before BDD was cool. It was a way of connecting a description and tables of examples together with the code, so they interacted really well, and it was a special markup language that you could use, or you could use Excel tables or Word tables, so you could have little examples of stuff, and it would run green and red, and it would light up, and it was above the unit test level. It was at the integration test level, and I worked with that quite a bit, and there were good things about it, really good things about it, like being able to describe what the function was supposed to do, and then have tables of values for it, and then describe a little bit more, and then have some more tables of value for that, and they would run green or red, depending on whether there was an error. The rows would light up if you had a problem with it. And it was pretty cool. It had some problems, especially in the way people applied it, but it was a pretty cool thing. It helped to bridge the space in between testers who were only interacting with the product directly as a user would, and with programmers who were only doing unit testing. It was a nice set of tools for that. Ward is in my mind, a wonderful person. Kent Beck gives Ward an immense amount of respect for his guidance and leadership in those days. But there was a bug, and that is that that part was a feature. But there was a bug, and that was that the notions of testing in many places became suffused with programmers' ideas about testing. And so that meant unit testing and functional correctness. And it meant, if there's a problem, the only way to solve the problem is with code, and not with skill, and not with training, and not with analysis, and so on. There's also this notion of the definition of done. Definition of done. When I look at definitions of done, every time I see a definition of done, I see 6 or 7 items on a list, right? That's how we know we're done at the end of this sprint, or that's how we know we're done the product. There's a big problem with that, and that is you can meet a definition of done and still have terrible problems in the product. Terrible problems in the product. So I propose, modestly, this is a little bit different from the quadrant stuff, I propose that we have a definition, not a definition of done, just take a whole idea and turn it into a definition of not done yet. Right? Instead of a DOD, it's a DONDY, DOND. Definition of not done yet. And what we'll say is, if these 7 or 8 things, if any one of them is not true, okay, we're definitely not done. But when all 7 of these things are true, we might be done. Now, as I believe J.B. Rainsberger said, okay, now it's time to give it to some real testers to kick the snot out of it. That to me would be a great idea. So, testing became confused with output checking. And we don't know where those problems are in the product until we've experimented with it and explored it. So, what would testing look like in Agile context if all of the principles in the Agile Manifesto were being honored, or at least the big 4? It would mean we'd focus on the skill set and the mindset of the tester. And by the tester, I mean the person doing testing. It doesn't have to be a person with a job title tester, but anybody who's focused on testing would put on the tester hat for a while and would focus on the skill set and the mindset of testing for that purpose. Work with software, over comprehensive documentation, so we'd eliminate the wasteful stuff, we'd emphasize the investigation, learning, we'd emphasize activity. Customer collaboration, answering the needs of the client and the team in our testing, and not necessarily focusing on the letter of a bunch of BDD examples. And responding to change or following the plan, responding to the mission. That's what it would mean for testing if we were doing testing in an Agile context. I loved what Scott Barber came up with at one point. I thought it was really brilliant. He said, testing is testing, Agile is context. Right? An Agile software development project is just yet another place in which testing happens. And we have to respond to that context if we're going to be responsible testers. So, here we go again with that same loop, the original loop. Let's focus on the high value of the product, because that's one of the principles, one of the 12 principles that follow the manifesto. Build with change in mind. That is all about low cost of development, because continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. As we go around this loop, what do we run into? Well, down here, we've got a building mindset as we're building some of it and building with change in mind. That's focused on building. Up here, when we're studying what we built to discover something worth building or something worth fixing, that's where the testing mindset is. So how does that play out over the whole team? Well, it seems the whole team meets in the upper right corner as we're discovering something worth building and then planning to build something about it. We're focused on envisioning success. What will this product look like? What do we want in our dreams? As we're building some of it, we're going to be focusing on the details, the little bits and pieces, the nitty-gritty, the foundations of it that we need in order to build a product. As we build it with change in mind and prepare to study what we built, we're doing that because we anticipate there might be failure lurking. And then, in this corner up here, defocusing. Focusing and defocusing. Expanding our view to the whole product, the whole system, and things about the system. And by about, I also mean around the interaction of the product with the people who use it and with the people who are affected by it. That leads to 4 questions. Question number 1. As we meet with the team, developers, testers, designers, support people, you ever notice the whole team approach doesn't include the support people? What's up with that? I want my whole team to include the support people. They're the ones who are going to have to deal with the problems. They're the ones who know what problems are like. They're hearing about it every day. They've got really close contact with the customer. I don't think we should throw that out as a former support person myself. So let's bring the whole team together and talk about, okay, how should this thing work? How should this thing work? And then as we're building it, we want to be thinking about, well, okay, we're building it, but are we building what we think we're building? That's a useful question to ask. As we're preparing to study it, what do we have to do in order to test efficiently, inexpensively, powerfully, in a way that's going to reveal problems? Because what we want to know is, do we know about every important bug? All right, so remember how I said that it's about 5 years ago, almost to the day, that James and I came up with this thing? Well, sometime last fall, he whipped this out on me, to my great surprise. He relabeled these 4 quadrants. Intention, design-focused testing, asking of questions, review that is focused on helping us discover what the customer really wants and what we really want from the product. Then, in the lower right-hand corner, discipline. Shallow testing. And shallow testing, I emphasize, is not a negative thing. What I'm saying is it's quick, it's efficient, it's focused on something we're really close to. It's not an attempt to go deep, it's just an attempt to determine if what we're doing is reasonably close to what we intended to do. So, that's the discipline part. Making sure that our intention and our building of the product match up. Then, preparation. Advocating to make the product reasonably testable and organizing the project, the infrastructure, the environments, all the things about the system to make testing work easier. And then finally, oh, this was really clever. James, you clever dog. Realization. Realization is a pun. 2 meanings. Realization in the sense that we've accomplished something. We've realized our goal. And realization in the sense of recognition. Oh my God, it does that? We don't want it to do that. I only just realized it did that. So that's deep testing that can help us to discover subtle, rare, intermittent, deeply buried, emergent, occasional problems that frustrate people who are going to use the product, frustrate the value of the product. So those are 4 frames for testing. 4 different ways of looking at testing. Now, here's another thing that James whipped on me that I didn't realize was going on in his head. And it's really interesting how, when people are working together, we get this sense of what we call shallow agreement. We appear to agree on something because we said, yeah. And it turns out we don't agree on it when we dig into it and study it more deeply and try to talk it over. I didn't realize that James had this in mind, and then after a while it made perfect sense to me. Watch. When we're developing the design of something, we want to establish what quality criteria might be important. We want to engage with various users or stakeholders. We would have put stakeholders, but it didn't quite fit in the box, so we said users. We should have put stakeholders. Specifying the product with rich examples. And Goiko Adzik and I have had a conversation about this, and I think he kind of agrees. He created this a notion called specification by example. You can't specify something by example. You can specify it with example, but you can't specify it by example. I'll prove it. Watch. 2, 4, 6, 8. What's the next turn?
65.
65? Why 65, Alex?
Why not?
Why not? A fine answer. How many people? 10 popped into your mind right away. Okay. Now, let's have a little testing exercise here. What other plausible, well-reasoned next terms could you come up with? 65, why not? Sure.
6 again.
6 again. What? Why 6 again?
No.
Oh, 2, 4, 6, 8, 6, 4, 2.
2 again.
2 again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. 8? 8. A? I'm reading your mind. A. Why A? Hexadecimal for 10. Right? It might be 10 or it might be A if we're counting in hexadecimal. 2, 4, 6, 8, 1, 3, 5, 7. 2, 4, 6, 8, 1, 3, 5, 7. 2, 4, 6, 8. Done.
80.
80.
So 2 has no enclosed spaces. 4 has 1, at least the way I write number 4. 8 has 2.
Yeah, what about 6?
6 has 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I tried to make a chain by just counting the enclosed spaces and going into
Well, maybe,
Fibonacci's.
well, no, maybe you start with 1 or with 2 enclosed spaces, right? And the 2 from the 4 and the 6 give you 2 for 8, and now you've got to go to 3 enclosed spaces, which is 80.
Yeah, okay, all right.
There's any number of ways you can justify it. You can't specify something by example. And be sure that the other person knows what the example means. But specifying something with example, I think, is a fantastic idea. That's what fit was all about, that thing that I was describing before. Rich examples help a lot. Rich examples help us to crystallize and clarify things, especially, by the way, when we're thinking about risk. An example of a risk, especially if it comes from a mistake that somebody else made, can be very, very evocative. It helps us to think about rich potentialities, vivid examples. Yeah, that really helps a lot. Reviewing reports in the field, very much tied to that idea. Exploring trade-offs in the design, refining user stories, everybody on the team's involved with that. And so that's why we color it blue, neither red nor green, which are the colors that we chose for the developers. The blue indicates a kind of trading zone where we got a bunch of different people in different roles interacting with each other. So, discipline, building cleanly and simply. Automating low-level checks, fine idea. If you're a developer and you want to do that, boy, that's great. That helps you. It helps to detect little coding errors and problems. Establishing and adhering to shared coding styles. Fixing bugs as we go, investigating them as we go, so little bugs don't get buried for too long. Reviewing each other's code. Developers working collaboratively together. Pairing is a really important part of the extreme programming principles. Integrating the product frequently, sure. Put it together and build it and see how it works with the other components. Refactoring, making things maintainable all the way through. Mostly developer work, that. Mostly programmer work. Testers can contribute, but programmers are responsible, take responsibility for managing their own discipline. That's cool. That's fine. As a tester, I'm great to hear that it's even happening. And if they like my help, I'm happy to help them. Fostering testability. Well, look, we've got another blue bubble here where we've got a trading zone. We've got people meeting. We've got tool builders and tool makers. We've got testers who are going to interact with the product, maybe mediated by those tools, maybe not. We've got developers, we've got DevOps people, we've got all those people meeting to figure out how we're going to prepare to make the product as testable as we can so we can learn about it really rapidly. And so we prepare our test environments and our tools. We design the product for intrinsic testability. Wait a second. Doesn't that go back to intention thing, designing the product for testability? Yeah, because some stuff leaks across these dimensions in ways which I was kind of preparing for earlier. Testing in parallel with coding. Sure, that's going to allow us to move faster. It's going to allow us to prepare. Providing access to the product at all of its possible interfaces, at the unit level, at the integration level, at the subsystem level, the component level, and at the end user level as well, minimizing trouble when changing the product, trying to keep things maintainable, trying to reduce the cost of change, and removing obstacles and things that are going to slow down the project in any way, but especially testing. And then realization. It's funny when we were writing this because we didn't know what to put in that top left bubble. And then, how do we describe deep testing in a way? Like earlier, we had been talking about envisioning success and anticipating failure and so on. How do we come up with words for that? And then this expression from Jerry Weinberg came to me. Experimenting imaginatively and suspiciously. In Jerry Weinberg's writing at one point, he had said, in order to be really good testers, we must develop a suspicious nature and a lively imagination. So I thought that was terrific. So, how do we do that really well? Well, first of all, we decide as testers, okay, we must not be done. Somehow there must be something that is here that is not done in some way. So we're skeptical about whether we're done. We model the system in diverse ways, especially going beyond given, when, then, or as a, I want to, so that I can. Not doing things formulaically, but doing things in lots of different diverse ways. Developing rich test data to challenge the product. Focusing on and revisiting ideas about risk. Investigating mysteries and curios and curiosity. And then telling compelling stories about the bugs that we found and the bugs that we've seen or heard from the field. And we believe that it's a powerful heuristic to have actual testers doing this work. So here's the thing that James surprised me with. I thought that this referred to, a sprint, or maybe to the whole development cycle. But then James said to me, breaking our shallow agreement, he says, no, this is everything. This applies to not just a long cycle through the project, or even a shorter cycle through a sprint. This applies to a one-line code change. It applies to the whole life cycle of the product. It applies to every little thing we do inside larger loops, because you see, development is not either a 4-year project or a 2-week project. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tiny projects too, even as it might be all those things as well. We could have a 2-week sprints over a 4-year period. And within those 2-week sprints, we have stories. And within those stories, we might have sub-stories, little vignettes, single-line code changes. And these 4 notions apply to any one of those. Development isn't linear, and it's not just loops, it's a fractal. You can look at every little burst of software development work and envision how we think about testing in terms of every little burst of development work being like this, every cycle of development work, every year of development work. All of these things apply at whatever level of granularity we're looking at for the project. So, testing is woven into development at every level. Every time that we do a little burst of development work, we're doing some of this stuff. So, there we go. There is our refactoring of the Agile testing quadrants in ways that I think are quite practical, and which you are welcome to adopt, and which you are welcome to adapt, and which you're welcome to throw out. Because another one of our principles is, we believe that every tester should invent testing for him or herself. And the reason for that is, it is because of our differences, of the diversity of ideas that come from our backgrounds, from our upbringings, from our cultures, from our languages, from our preferences, from our temperaments, from our religions. Everything that each one of us brings to the table is another opportunity to add a new way of thinking about the product and the project that will help us to find problems that matter to people. And as testers, that's what we've got to be mostly focused on. Risk, problems, bugs, so that we can help people who are building the product to build the best product that they can possibly build. Thanks.
So before we go to questions, I do something that's damaging to my own business and company because I've got something. So everyone is not only hiring developers, they're also hiring testers. And so please speak to Roland over there. So if you really want to work in an awesome team that really wants to be world-class testing on the planet.
And that's almost as good as how to test.
And so Roland is a guy, he not only leads a testing team here at Ergon, he's also a university-level lecturer on a postgraduate degree course on software testing.
What?
So that's what this guy does.
That's fantastic.
So I think this is really someone you would enjoy working with. I absolutely endorse Ergon as a good place for testing, and I do this with pain in my heart because I'm also hiring. But I can absolutely endorse Ergon as an employer. They're just cool. Yeah, they're cool people. There we go. Cool. So if you we do questions as well. So if you enjoyed this, we will most likely have. So we mentioned James a lot. So next time he's in Switzerland, he will be coming to the meetup as well. Some of the next people that will be in this meetup will be Robert Saberin, who will be here in June.
One of my favorite people.
So if you haven't experienced Robert Saberin, you just have to. He's one of the most special people on the planet. Then one of the next events that I'm also doing is kind of testing in the pub. So we will just go drink beer and find an excuse to drink beer while we talk about testing. So that's usually slightly limited in terms of people attending. So I tend to do that sometimes in June as well, so that we have just an open discussion on testing on any subject that's open there. And yeah, that's that. And again, so
Keep talking for 30 seconds.
So Michael is teaching rapid software testing tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. So if you're just bored and don't want to go to the office again, that would be a good choice. There are still some seats available if you can decide on that. So bridging the time until Michael comes back. Because we're open for questions and if you want to discuss something. So
just need some tester fuel.
Yeah. All right, there you go. So, some questions. Go ahead. Not everyone at the same time.
Yes, exactly. Just one at a time. Keep it down. These are all English speakers, is that right? I didn't make some kind of terrible mistake.
None of them speak English at all.
I see. Well, I knew that Switzerland was a polyglot kind of place.
I stumble over this preparation word.
Yeah.
While I understand what you want to say there, comes too close to me to this, we have to write test cases. I just don't like it from a publicity standpoint to call it preparation.
Oh, let me offer some alternatives that you can think. If somebody's going to say, oh, so you mean write test cases?
Yes.
First thing I'm going to say is testing is not about test cases. In fact, why don't I just go there? Testing is not test cases. Pilots don't use piloting cases, right? Parents don't use parenting cases. Researchers don't use research cases. Managers don't use management cases. What is preparation? Preparation is strategy. Preparation is preparing infrastructure. Preparation is studying the domain around the product. But I have not used test cases in my work probably since 2005.
No, I fully agree with you. I'm absolutely with you. I have the fear that this is somebody without me giving that explanation afterwards. Just
Well, but let's let's manage that. I think we can manage that. And the way we manage it is to say preparation. And by preparation, I mean not test cases. Let's start with that. And I think we're capable of doing that. I'm getting old, right? I'm getting to the point where I've been in this business long enough. It's been 30 years since I've been involved in, started to get involved in software development. It's my second career. But what I've noticed is there are lots of testers out there who are, it seems to me, a little reluctant to be the testing expert, right? And to take control of the communication, to take responsibility for declaring this is what we do. And to a certain degree, I understand testers' reluctance to do that because we're not those glamorous developers. We're not paid like developers are. I don't want to say that we're second-class citizens, because that's not, I don't think that's true. But we don't have the stature that developers do. We don't have the credibility that developers do. But then I want to say, well, what's our role in that? What's the responsibility that we take for being in that position? And I remember one time, a company invited me to come sit in. They sort of get to meet you, and they were thinking about hiring me to do some consulting work with them. And at the end of it, I sat in on some meetings, and we talked about this and that, and they were talking about, I think at one point they were talking about automated testing, and I said, can I just clarify something? I don't believe that testing can be automated. There's very useful roles for testing, or for tools in testing, and there is a thing that I've declared and described called automated checking. So I get to the end of that meeting, and they said, well, we're a little worried about bringing you in. I said, really, why? And they said, well, for a tester, you're kind of too powerful. Well, that's where I want to be. I want to be powerful. Not that I want to take control of the project, but I want to be powerful in the sense that I want to be able to articulate what testing work is about. And the reason for that is, if nobody else does it, it's not going to get done. It's just not going to get done. So I encourage you, first of all, if you can come up with a better word than preparation, bring it. That's great. And you can tell me about it if you want, or you can just keep it to yourself if you like, or you can tell all your friends and not tell me. That's okay. But what is important is for you to be able to use whatever words you use comfortably and with authority, because they're yours. That's what I meant by testers having to invent testing for themselves. You've got to, I believe as a tester, you've got to own your methodology. You've got to be the pilot in command of the testing work that you do. And that means sometimes negotiating with other people on the team, or even with other testers. What are we talking about? What do we mean by this and that? And when we do that, I think what we do is we develop a culture and a community within our development group in which testing becomes respected. Testing becomes really important because we talk like professionals, because we are professionals, and that interpenetrates and interacts. So, thank you for bringing that up. Serge, yes?
Yeah, basically, from another perspective, we have a confusion of terminology in a variety of subjects. For example, even technical people can mess up badly. You have example of USB 3.0 standard, which can be 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, and renamed a couple of times in the meantime, and basically manufacturers are overusing this to sell you low speed as a high speed.
Yeah, it's funny how the word standard, there's 8 different definitions for the word standard. I just thought you ought to know about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, and we also have this kind of confusing situation like testing and test cases, but we also have like basic problems with the naming conventions. For example, we have test managers. And do you know about any kind of initiative to, let's say, introduce a better wording for whatever we are doing, like automation testing versus checking and trying to clarify, because you don't have usually code managers. You
have development managers.
But normally you do have test managers.
Well, more and more I'm seeing test managers under attack. The whole role is kind of being pulled out. And I think that's an unfortunate thing. I think it is a good idea to have somebody who is responsible for managing testing work to some degree, not necessarily saying all the testers work for me all the time, every day, in my little area of the office. No, testers can be distributed. What we need is somebody to represent testing at a management level and to make life easier for testers. Like, some of the problems you talked about, it seems to me, relate to our whole notion of management. Never mind whether it's a test manager or development manager. To me, a manager is not somebody who's responsible for making sure the work gets done. A manager is somebody who makes it possible for work to get done. But the thing is, everywhere we go, that's going to be a different situation. It's like at this point in my career, I believe I've taught RST in some form in 35 countries now. And nobody agrees on anything, even in the same country. But they come to agreement, right? We are constantly negotiating this stuff. We're constantly figuring stuff out. And that, to me, is entirely predictable when we're making new stuff. We've got a feature that does something. What do we call it? And we come up with a name, and maybe we like it, maybe we don't. It's really hard after the name gets inserted to change it. Story from Interac, actually. See if I can describe this. We were working on email money transfer. The way it works is, Serge, I owe you some money. Lucky you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my bank, and I'm going to specify, please send $100 to Serge. And you get an email. And when you get the email, there's a link. And the link will take you to the Interac website, and then you choose which bank you want to direct the money to. It might be my bank, or it might be a bank that we both bank at, or it might be some other bank, or it might be a trust company, or credit. Any one of 283 different institutions in Canada at the time. So I noticed there was something weird that I didn't quite understand about this. Because there were 4 roles in this. The sender, and the receiver, and the payer, and the payee. Well, it seemed to make sense to me that the person who sent the email would be the sender. And the person who received the email would be the receiver. And it seemed to make sense to me that the person who was giving money would be the payer, and the person who was getting money would be the payee. Turns out that was exactly backwards. And we only found this out because what I did, I was confused, so I said, you know what, could we have just a session, I'm going to call it Interac University. We're going to sit together and we're going to have the developers give all 3 of us testers a lecture on the architecture of this product. Because I was a new guy and I can get away with stuff like that. So the developer says, all right, now the first thing that happens is that the sender sends an email, or the sender is the person who triggers the email that's been sent from a financial institution. And another developer says, no, that's the payer. He said, what? That's the payer. The person who triggers the email, that's not the sender, that's the payer. He says, but I thought the person who sent the money would be the payer. He says, well, it is, but the person who receives the email, that's the payee. Well, wait a minute, why do we have two different things? Because we realized at a certain point that the payee might designate somebody else to pick up the funds. Like it turns out, Serge, I owe you $100, you owe Monica $100, so the easiest thing to do is just forward the email to her and she can cash it. She is now the receiver of the money, but the payee of the email message. And I asked, how do things get that way? And the development manager said, because they did. It's just the way it happened. We realized later that these were actually, in some ways, subtly different entities. So I said, okay, I get it now. And I went back to my desk, and I had a big dinner of bugs available to me. They laid it out on a plate for me. I knew that the confusion would lead to that. But that's how stuff works, right? That's how stuff happens. We develop words for things, and maybe they weren't the perfect words, and maybe we keep them, maybe we don't. But they change and they evolve, and every time we're building something new, we put new labels on stuff. Which is why I think it's important for developers, sure too, but certainly testers, to study linguistics.
So, and there we come to you bullshitting search on the 8 alleged meanings of the word standard, which is absolutely not true, because I just checked on the fully paid version of my good friend Oxford English Dictionary, and it lists 28 noun meanings of standard, 6 as an adjective and 2 as a verb. But that's just because you...
I go by this one, which is the concise Oxford Dictionary. You paid for the $300 subscription.
Exactly, but you're using the kids version. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm using it to... Okay. I meant to say at least 8. At least 8 would be correct. 8 would be not. Well, yeah, you see.
I have 8 children, if that does not exclude that I have 9. So minimum is the same as standard.
I love being in a room with testers. And it's like being just walking through it. It's like, it's like trying to walk through a minefield and not step on any linguistic mines.
I was just saying that you were right first time. Can I come back to your example?
You absolutely can.
Wouldn't you say that the problem is that the domain was not defined, or there isn't any domain, and for testing purposes also should extend to also check for proper linguistic and domain issues?
Well, absolutely, and it is a form of testing. I got into a big argument one time with James and Ken Kaner, which I lost. Never happier to lose an argument later. But James Lindsay and I were on one side of the argument. James Lindsay had said, well, you can't test the product unless you've got it in front of you. Ken Kaner and James Bach on the other side said, you absolutely can. And I said, how can you possibly do that? And they said, what if you have an idea for testing something that you don't have, and you work that out in your head? And I said, that's called review. And James says, that's a testing activity review. We're testing an idea. We're not necessarily testing a product. So latterly, in fact, James over at the last testing meetup right here in Switzerland, James overheard me talking to another tester about testing. And what we have since been careful about saying is there's a difference between testing and performing a test. There are many, many things involved with testing, and one of them is actually performing a test. So there's lots and lots of test activity, conjecture, modeling, studying the product, which is, for those of you who've not been familiar with this, I want to go over it just in case. How many people have not heard of this distinction that we started making almost exactly 10 years ago? Testing and checking. Thank you. Good. For the 5 of you. Everybody else can help me tell the story of this. I want to call this checking and not testing. This is not to say that this isn't a testing activity, but it's not testing. In the same way, by the way, well, I'll tell you why.
Well, then again, you have agreed that this is not true because it is encapsulated in the whole sphere of testing. So that this is the argument that we've had for years.
Yes, and let me
see. It's not a comparison between equals. It's a comparison between the whole and part of it.
That's right. That's right.
That's the verse. So you often have this that you disregard the connotational load that some of the words have there. Versus is one of them. Shallow is one of them. So I'll talk to you on that later.
Right, well, that's why we try to manage that when we talk about it, and here's what happens. Somebody, through a series of broken telephone Chinese whispers, they say, they're saying checking's not testing. And that's the story that you get. The wider you spread it, the thinner it gets. So let me be clear, for the 5 of you who have not heard this before, I'm going to try this out on you and see if you dig my rap. What I mean by checking is a tactic of testing, included in testing, part of testing that involves operating a product mechanistically or algorithmically to check specific facts about it. We can agree that there is such a behavior or such an activity within testing, yes? Such an action. Where we observe the product specific algorithmic ways to collect specific observations, and then we evaluate it by applying algorithmic decision rules to the observations, and then reporting the outputs of the evaluations algorithmically. Do you see a word here that seems to be common across the board? Yes, algorithmically. What this means is that a check can be performed just like a spelling checker, but we don't call a spelling checker automated editing. It's a part of editing. It's a part of editing. We might use a spelling checker as we're editing something, but nobody calls that automated editing. They call it spell checking. So a check can be performed by a machine that cannot think, but which has the virtue of being very fast, very precise, very specific. Or a check can be performed by a sufficiently disengaged human being. A human being who's been told, don't think, just follow the instructions. Except that humans never ever do that. Because humans do this annoying, interruptive thing called thinking. In which, if they see a problem that they can't get their heads around, they do not freeze and turn blue. They go and ask for help, or they try something different, or they deviate from the algorithm. That's the thing that humans will do. They'll jump outside the algorithm. Also notice, by the way, that when we talk about quick and slow in this context, what we're talking about is the speed of observable behaviors, not actions. An action is something in Harry Collins's parlance that is behavior plus intention. For it to be an action, in Harry's words, it's got to have intention behind it. Machines don't have intentions, humans do. So the human's desire to satisfy his or her client will take precedence over following the algorithm when the human gets stuck. And the human will jump out of that situation, and the machine won't. The machine will turn blue, or it will log an error, maybe, after it times out, or maybe it'll just crash. Who knows? But the other thing the machine won't do, the machine will never say, oh, that's weird. I wonder if, did they really mean to do that? Wait, that can't be right. The machine will never say, that's not what they meant to tell me. The machine will just do what the machine does. So, the trouble is that testing includes checking. But testing is not checking in exactly the same way that forests include trees. But forests are not trees. In exactly the same way that leaves are parts of trees. But leaves are not trees. You got a pile of leaves in the ground there. Nobody ever says, hey, that's my tree. But that's somebody looking at them kind of funny. So, look at that. I messed up the animation. Look at that. Testing is evaluating a product by learning about it through exploration and experimentation. That's how we define testing. And it includes checking. Checking is a part of testing. Checking is a tactic of testing. Checking is embedded in testing. And that's important because for a check to be any good at all, it's got to be surrounded by testing. It's got to be surrounded by studying the product, questioning it, observing it, actually observing it, manipulating, actually manipulating. It's got to be involved in generating ideas and expanding on ideas that we've generated, and refining ideas that we've expanded on, and overproducing ideas, and abandoning ideas that we've overproduced, and then recovering ideas that we've abandoned. It's got to include recording and reporting and navigating and map making and collaboration with other people. It's got to include analysis, especially analysis about risk, analysis about the structure of the product. It includes all those things, and checking is just a part of it. In exactly the same way, by the way, that biting is not eating. See? That's biting. That's eating. Eating is a social activity. Biting is just a part of eating. And biting, we can actually automate. We can use tools to bite. Or other kinds of tools. People don't confuse biting and eating. They don't confuse compiling and programming. In fact, programmers years ago, used to, somebody tried to say that a compiler was an autocoder, and all the programmers said, out of the pool. None of that talk. That's not an autocoder. We're going to call it a compiler. That's what it's going to do. It compiles the code. It doesn't code it. It doesn't program it. That's the part of programming that can be done automatically. But testers, I think, have kind of let that escape. That's got out of the lab, and people call this stuff automated checking. They call it automated testing. But it's just a fragment of testing, what testing is all about. Sure, it's very powerful, very useful, but it's not testing in exactly the same way that a spell checker is not editing. Does that address it? Some?
Yeah, sure. So what I would propose now is...
one more question. Or one or two more questions. Now that we got the ball.
Okay, let's have one more question. Sure.
Where do you stand then with the terminology validation, verification, with checking and testing?
Oh man, you missed the last time I was here. When I did a talk with James on the logic of verification. Let me encapsulate that by saying validation is forming an opinion about something upon which people can agree. That's not too far away from notions of validation that exist in qualitative research. Verification is something that we can only do with respect to a matter of fact that we can establish based on observation. And here's the thing, we can't verify that a product will work. We can form an opinion, we can validate the notion that it probably will work, that it seems to work, but we can't even verify that it works. We can verify that we saw it work. Although we can't verify that it worked perfectly because there's all that stuff that we didn't necessarily see, right? Oh look, we did 2 and then plus and then 2, and a 4 came out. And in the background, files were being deleted and a personally identifiable information was being sent to hackersrus.org, right? So we can't verify that the product is doing something. We can verify that we saw it do something. That we can verify logically, but that's a whole other evening. I don't really caught in the validation and verification very much. I like to think about testing. You had a question too.
Yeah, I'm thinking about why not eliminating testing and use common sense instead.
Oh, common sense.
Common sense.
Yeah, something that everybody understands.
No, testing is common sense. So it's not so. We should go back to the basics and use common sense and think about what you also showed. What is really valuable, what is valuable the business needs, and so on. So we can fill 2 hours of discussing testing. At the end, it's common sense.
So in the end, what's funny is I'm going to disagree with you really strongly, and then I'm going to show you how we agree. Because what you think common sense means might not be what you think it means. Historically. Because I'm gonna play the Aristotle card now. I'm gonna go back to the Nicomachean Ethics, where he defines something which the Romans turned into sensus communis, which means your senses acting in common. So, like, it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, for sure smells like a duck. It's probably a duck. That is the sense in which Aristotle thought of the common sense as a faculty, which is the synthesis of the input from your senses processed into something where we can make a reasonable conclusion about it. Now, that sounds like we disagree, kind of, because in modern times, common sense is, well, it's just stuff everybody knows, you know, we all agree on this sort of stuff. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that everybody does agree about anything in particular. But you're on to something important, I think, because what we're doing when we're testing is we're gathering evidence from our senses, and we're putting them all together and saying, well, if this is true, and if this is true, and if this is true, all of those things in common give us a conclusion that is literally sensible. That is, sensible in the French sense, sensible, right? We can be sensitive to it. We can all agree that this is all this way. So the trouble with that is, the trouble with saying that testing is kind of common sense, is that there's all these interpretations of common sense out there, and you know what? You're welcome to do that if you think it will help. And then the marketplace of ideas will decide. I agree with you in terms of, that's really what we're trying to get at. Our senses in common agreeing on what the product is. I think it's going to face some uphill stuff, because I don't think people have thought about common sense that deeply. But you know, it's. I agree with you. Testing, for me, testing is applied critical thinking in the same kind of way. But the great thing is, we can talk about it, and we can talk about it over beer in a less formal way. So let's do that.
Yeah, so common sense, unfortunately, not so common in nowadays. So that's the thing.
And
so now,
and it doesn't make sense.
We're still here, so there is a possibility to have a chat with Michael
And with
in
each other.
person. There's also a wonderful opportunity to get a new job. With Bolton, or me as well. Or then I think Daniel would be for the developer part, so that would be also something. Then let's continue having a chat. I think this is a nice way to just mingle and kind of just exchange thoughts and talk a bit. There are some, I think, chips still available. There's some drinks.
And once again, thank you so much for your attention and for your engagement. I really appreciate it.